Sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one carrying the truth everyone else forgot. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes. Soft violin music drifted through the air, while servers in black uniforms moved quietly between tables covered in white roses and gold-trimmed linens. Everything about the evening had been designed to look perfect. The guests called it the wedding of the year. Alexander Hayes, the billionaire founder of Hayes Technologies, was only minutes away from marrying Victoria Sterling, a woman whose family name carried almost as much influence as his fortune. Reporters waited outside the country club gates. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway. Every seat inside the grand ballroom had been carefully assigned. Every detail had been planned. Every name had been approved. Or so everyone believed. Near the back entrance, Emily Carter adjusted the sleeve of her catering uniform and balanced a silver tray in her hands. At 32, she had learned how to become invisible. Wealthy guests rarely noticed women like her. They noticed champagne. They noticed decorations. They noticed each other. But not the waitress quietly carrying their drinks. Emily preferred it that way. Beside her stood her 8-year-old son, Noah, wearing a clean navy sweater she had saved 3 weeks to buy. His blonde hair was neatly combed. His blue eyes moved across the ballroom with innocent curiosity. "Stay close to me, okay?" Emily whispered. Noah nodded. "I will, Mom." She smiled softly and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. It had taken everything she had to arrange childcare. And when those plans collapsed that morning, bringing Noah had been her only option. The catering manager reluctantly agreed as long as the boy remained out of sight. For nearly 2 hours, everything went smoothly. Noah sat quietly near the service corridor reading a library book while Emily worked. Then one small mistake changed everything. A rolling cart blocked the hallway leading to the staff area. Looking for his mother, Noah took a wrong turn. Instead of reaching the kitchen, he stepped directly into the main ballroom. The timing could not have been worse. Guests had begun gathering near the floral arch where the ceremony would start. Conversations filled the room. Camera flashes sparkled. Noah stopped, realizing he was somewhere he should not be. Before he could turn around, a sharp voice cut through the crowd. "Excuse me." Victoria Sterling stood only a few feet away. Her designer gown caught the light as she looked down at the boy. Her smile disappeared instantly. "Who are you?" Noah swallowed. "I'm looking for my mom." Victoria glanced at his sweater, then toward the staff entrance. Her expression hardened. "This area is for invited guests only." Several nearby guests turned their heads. The room seemed quieter suddenly. Noah lowered his eyes. "My mom works here." Victoria folded her arms. "Then you belong in the employee section." "Not here." The boy nodded politely. "Okay, ma'am." But Victoria wasn't finished. Embarrassed that attention had shifted away from her carefully planned event, she motioned toward a security guard standing nearby. "Please escort him out of the ballroom." Noah froze. Around them, whispers began spreading through the crowd. The guard approached gently, but before he could speak, Noah noticed a large framed guest list displayed beside the entrance. Hundreds of names filled the elegant pages. His eyes moved across the list. Then suddenly they stopped. His expression changed. Confusion, recognition, then certainty. "Wait," Noah said quietly. The guard paused. Victoria frowned. "What is it now?" Noah stepped closer to the guest list. His small finger touched one name near the center of the page. A name he had heard before. Many times. A name spoken every year on his birthday. A name his mother never forgot. Noah looked up and read it aloud. The moment the name left his lips, a champagne glass slipped from someone's hand. Across the ballroom, Alexander Hayes stopped walking. And for the first time that evening, the future groom looked genuinely afraid. The name hung in the air like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. Conversations stopped. The violinists lowered their bows. Even the soft clinking of crystal glasses seemed to disappear beneath the weight of a single word. Noah stood beside the guest list, his small hand still resting on the frame. He did not understand why everyone looked so shocked. He had only read a name. Alexander Hayes remained motionless near the center aisle. His heartbeat felt louder than the music had moments before. Jonathan Reed. For 10 years, he had avoided hearing that name spoken aloud. Yet now it had come from the voice of a child he had never met. Across the ballroom, Emily felt the color drain from her face. The silver tray nearly slipped from her fingers. "No, not here. Not tonight." She moved quickly through the crowd, her eyes locked on Noah. Guests stepped aside as she approached. Victoria noticed the sudden attention shifting away from her and frowned. This was supposed to be her moment. Every camera, every guest, every conversation, everything was supposed to revolve around her wedding day. Instead, hundreds of eyes were focused on a waitress and a little boy. "Emily," Noah said softly when she reached him. "I am sorry." She knelt beside him immediately. "It is okay, sweetheart." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "We should go." Noah nodded. Then he looked back at the guest list. "But Mom, why is Jonathan Reed on that board?" Emily closed her eyes for a brief second. Around them, people exchanged confused glances. Most guests had never heard the name before. Alexander had. He knew every letter of it, every memory attached to it, every promise that came with it. Victoria stepped forward. "I think this has gone far enough," she said firmly. "The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Nobody answered her. For the first time in years, Alexander was not listening. His attention remained fixed on Emily and Noah. Something about the boy felt strangely familiar. The blonde hair, the blue eyes, the quiet confidence. A feeling he could not explain settled into his chest. Emily stood and gently took Noah's hand. "Come on," she whispered. "We need to get back to work." "Wait." Alexander's voice cut through the silence. Emily froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alexander took several slow steps toward them. His expensive shoes barely made a sound against the polished floor. When he stopped, he looked directly at Noah. "How do you know that name?" he asked. Noah glanced up at his mother before answering. Emily's expression told him not to speak. But children often notice truths adults try to hide. "Because my mom talks about him," Noah said honestly. "Every year." Alexander felt something tighten inside him. "Every year." Noah nodded. "On my birthday." The crowd became even quieter. Emily stared at the floor. Victoria crossed her arms impatiently. "Alexander," she said, forcing a smile. "This is clearly some misunderstanding." But Alexander barely heard her. His eyes remained on Noah. "What does your mother say about him?" Noah thought for a moment. "She says some people leave this world too early." Emily's breath caught. The ballroom lights reflected against tears she refused to let fall. Alexander looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time. Something about her face stirred a distant memory buried beneath years of success, meetings, acquisitions, and headlines. A memory connected to a hospital hallway, a rainstorm, and a promise he had never managed to keep. Then Noah said something else. Something simple. Something innocent. "My mom says Jonathan Reed was the bravest man she ever knew." And suddenly, Alexander realized this was no coincidence at all. Emily wanted to leave. Every instinct told her to take Noah's hand, walk through the service door, and disappear before any more questions could be asked. That had been her strategy for years. Stay quiet. Work hard. Do not look back. Yet as she stood beneath the glow of the chandeliers, she knew the past had finally found her. Alexander Hayes studied her face with growing disbelief. Memories long buried were beginning to surface. 10 years earlier, before his company became a billion-dollar empire, before magazine covers and private jets, there had been a different version of him. A young entrepreneur trying to build something meaningful. And beside him had been Jonathan Reed. Loyal. Brilliant. Steady. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. Emily forced a smile. "No, sweetheart." Her voice almost broke. Emily lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened around Noah's hand. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she reached beneath the collar of her uniform and pulled out a thin silver chain. Hanging from it was an old ring. Worn. Scratched. Simple. Alexander immediately recognized it. Jonathan wore that ring every day. The sight of it felt like opening a door that had been locked for a decade. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. Emily looked at the ring before answering. "He gave it to me." A murmur spread through the crowd. Victoria's expression hardened. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. Suddenly, details began falling into place. Noah's age, Emily's reaction, the names spoken on birthdays, the ring. None of it was random. None of it was coincidence. Noah glanced between them, confused by the emotions on every face. "Mom." Emily knelt beside him. She brushed a hand through his blonde hair. Her eyes shimmered beneath the ballroom lights. "Do you remember the stories I used to tell you?" Noah nodded. "About the man who always helped people?" "Yes." "The man who believed promises mattered?" Another nod. Emily smiled sadly. That man was Jonathan. Alexander felt his chest tighten. The violinists remained silent. The guests remained frozen. Even Victoria stopped speaking, because everyone in the room had reached the same realization at exactly the same moment. The little boy standing beside the waitress was not connected to Jonathan Reed by memory alone. He was connected by something far deeper. And for the first time in 10 years, Alexander Hayes began to understand why fate had brought Emily Carter and her son into this ballroom on the very day he thought his future had already been decided. The silence inside the ballroom felt heavier than any speech that had been planned for the evening. Hundreds of guests stood beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, yet nobody seemed interested in the wedding anymore. Their attention remained fixed on three people standing near the guest list: a billionaire, a waitress, and a little boy who had unknowingly opened a door to the past. Alexander Hayes looked at the silver ring hanging from Emily's necklace. He remembered the day Jonathan bought it. A small jewelry store. A rainy Saturday afternoon. Jonathan had laughed when Alexander questioned the purchase. Not everything valuable has to be expensive, he had said. Back then, neither of them had much money. They only had ambition and trust. Alexander had forgotten many details over the years, but not that ring. Never that ring. Emily, he said quietly. How long did you know him? Emily hesitated. Noah squeezed her hand. The boy sensed the tension but did not fully understand it. 3 years, she finally answered. We met before he left Chicago. Alexander nodded slowly. Every answer seemed to create 10 more questions. Why did nobody ever tell me? Emily looked away. Because there was nothing left to tell. The words carried a sadness that immediately caught his attention. Victoria stepped forward again, struggling to regain control of the situation. Alexander, these people clearly have a personal story, but this is not the time. Her voice remained polite, yet impatience slipped through every word. The ceremony should begin. Several wedding coordinators exchanged nervous looks. The musicians remained frozen. The guests remained silent. Alexander did not move. No, he said softly. Victoria blinked. No, not yet. It was the first time all evening that anyone had openly contradicted her. Across the room, whispers spread from table to table. Emily noticed the attention and felt deeply uncomfortable. She had spent years avoiding exactly this kind of moment. Attention brought questions. Questions brought memories. Memories brought pain. We should leave, she whispered to Noah. Mom, Noah asked carefully, was Jonathan my dad? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Every conversation stopped again. Emily closed her eyes. She had always known this day would come. She simply never imagined it would happen in front of hundreds of strangers. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at her son. Yes, she answered. He was. Noah remained quiet. Children often process life differently than adults. Instead of shock, there was curiosity. Was he a good person? Emily smiled through tears she could no longer hide. The best person I ever knew. Alexander lowered his head. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom disappeared completely. He remembered Jonathan helping co-workers nobody noticed. Remembered him staying late when everyone else went home. Remembered him sharing credit instead of taking it. The description fit perfectly. Then another realization struck him. Noah was 8 years old. Jonathan had died 10 years earlier. The timeline made no sense. Alexander looked up immediately. Emily saw the question forming before he spoke it. Her expression changed. The sadness became heavier. Older. There is something you do not know, she said. Alexander felt a chill run through him. The guests leaned closer. Even Victoria remained silent now. Emily reached into the pocket of her catering apron and carefully removed a folded envelope. The paper was old, the edges worn. She had carried it for years. Jonathan wrote this before everything changed, she said. I never knew what to do with it. Alexander stared at the envelope. His heart began to race. Because written across the front, in handwriting he recognized instantly, was his own name. For several seconds, nobody moved. Alexander stared at the envelope as if it had traveled through time. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. He had seen it on business plans, coffee-stained notebooks, birthday cards, and hundreds of handwritten notes left on his desk during the earliest days of the company. Jonathan Reed. Even after 10 years, Alexander recognized every curve of every letter. Emily held the envelope carefully, not because it was valuable in a financial sense, but because it carried the weight of a life interrupted. He asked me to give it to you, she said quietly. But after everything happened, I could never find the right moment. Alexander slowly reached for it. His hands were steady in boardrooms, steady during negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet now they trembled slightly. The ballroom remained silent as he unfolded the aged paper. Noah stood close beside his mother, watching with innocent curiosity. Victoria looked increasingly uncomfortable. The wedding schedule had completely collapsed, but nobody seemed to care anymore. Alexander began reading. The first line alone stole the air from his lungs. My friend, if you are reading this, then life did not unfold the way either of us planned. Alexander swallowed hard. The words felt alive. Jonathan's voice echoed through every sentence. There were no dramatic revelations, no secrets about money, no hidden business deals. It was simply Jonathan speaking from the heart. He wrote about gratitude, about friendship, about believing Alexander would someday build something extraordinary. Several guests lowered their eyes, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal. Then Alexander reached a paragraph that changed everything. If Emily ever finds herself alone, help her if you can. She will never ask for it. That is who she is. But she deserves kindness. Alexander stopped reading. His eyes lifted toward Emily. She immediately looked away. The letter continued. And if the child we dream about someday enters this world without me there to meet them, tell them I loved them before I even knew their face. Noah frowned slightly. Is he talking about me? He asked softly. Emily nodded. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Yes, sweetheart. The boy was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Not because he fully understood the situation, but because hearing those words mattered, more than anyone realized. Alexander continued reading. The final paragraph was short. Simple. Pure Jonathan. Life is unpredictable. Success comes and goes. Titles change. Money changes. What matters is who sits at your table when the room grows quiet. Take care of the people who matter, before it is too late. Alexander lowered the letter. The ballroom remained completely still. Even the wedding staff had stopped working. Victoria finally stepped forward. Alexander, she said carefully, I understand this is emotional, but we have guests waiting. Her words sounded smaller now, less important somehow. Alexander looked around the room, then at Noah, then at Emily. He realized something unsettling. He had spent years chasing growth, acquisitions, recognition, and influence. Yet the most meaningful moment of the evening had come from a folded letter and a little boy standing beside a guest list. Noah suddenly pointed toward one corner of the ballroom. Mom, he said, is that him? Everyone followed the direction of his finger. Hanging near the entrance was a large display celebrating the company Alexander had built. Among the framed photographs was an image from 10 years earlier. Two young men standing shoulder to shoulder in a tiny office. One of them was Alexander. The other was Jonathan Reed. And for the first time that night, Noah saw his father's face. Noah slowly walked toward the framed photograph. The ballroom lights reflected across the glass as he studied the face he had never seen before. For years, Jonathan Reed had existed only through stories, through birthday conversations, through a silver ring, through memories that belonged to other people. Now, for the first time, he was real. He looks kind, Noah said quietly. The simple observation touched everyone who heard it. Alexander stared at the photograph as well. The image had been taken during the earliest days of Hayes Technologies. Back when success was uncertain. Back when two friends shared a tiny office, folding chairs, and a belief that hard work could build something meaningful. Jonathan was smiling in the picture, not because of money, not because of recognition, simply because he was happy to be there. Emily approached the photograph slowly. She had not seen that image in years. Her eyes lingered on Jonathan's face. For a moment, the noise of the ballroom disappeared. She remembered long walks through Chicago parks, small coffee shops, conversations about the future, dreams that seemed simple at the time, dreams that life never allowed them to finish together. Why did you never tell me? Alexander finally asked. Emily looked at him. Tell you what? About Noah. The question carried no anger, only regret. Emily lowered her eyes. Because I did not know how. Alexander waited. Emily took a slow breath. After Jonathan passed away, everything happened so fast. I found out about the pregnancy weeks later. I tried reaching people from his old life. Nobody knew where you were. Then your company started growing. Every year you seemed farther away. She paused. Eventually, I stopped trying. Alexander felt the weight of her words. While he was building an empire, someone connected to the person he trusted most had been facing life alone. Not because she wanted help. Not because she expected anything. Simply because circumstances had separated their paths. Noah looked between them. Mom always said we were okay, he said. Emily smiled gently. Because we were. And it was true. She had never spoken with bitterness. Never taught Noah to feel cheated by life. She worked double shifts when necessary. Took evening classes when she could. Sacrificed quietly. The way millions of parents do every day without expecting applause. Across the ballroom, several guests wiped away tears. Even people who had arrived expecting luxury and celebration now found themselves invested in a completely different story. Victoria, however, stood apart from the crowd. The expression on her face grew colder with every passing minute. She watched Alexander carefully, watched the attention shifting away from the wedding, watched emotions she could not control taking over the evening. "This changes nothing," she said suddenly. Her voice cut through the silence. Several heads turned. "A touching story does not change anything." Alexander looked at her. The room grew still again. Victoria straightened her shoulders. "Jonathan Reed is gone. The past is the past. We should finish what everyone came here for." For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in Alexander's eyes. Because Victoria was partially right. The past could not be changed. Yet standing only a few feet away was a little boy carrying the legacy of someone he had loved like a brother. And deep down, Alexander could feel a question growing louder with every passing second. What if this unexpected meeting was not interrupting his future at all? What if it was revealing what truly mattered before it was too late to see it? Alexander turned away from the guests and walked slowly toward the tall windows overlooking the country club gardens. Beyond the glass, the evening sky glowed with shades of amber and blue. The ceremony lights shimmered across the lawn where hundreds of chairs had been arranged in perfect rows. Everything had been planned. Everything had been measured. Everything had been controlled. Yet none of it felt certain anymore. Behind him, the ballroom remained silent. People who normally checked stock prices and business headlines were now watching a man wrestle with a decision no amount of money could solve. Noah wandered closer to the display of old photographs. He stopped at another framed image showing Alexander and Jonathan carrying boxes into their first office. "They look happy," he said. Alexander glanced over his shoulder. "We were." Noah studied the picture carefully. Even though the office was tiny, a faint smile appeared on Alexander's face. Especially because it was tiny. Several guests chuckled softly. For the first time all evening, the tension eased. Noah looked back at the photograph. "Mom says people smile differently when they are grateful." Emily blinked. The observation sounded so much like Jonathan that it almost hurt. Alexander felt it too. Jonathan used to say similar things. Small things. Wise things. The kind of thoughts people remembered years later. Victoria stepped closer once again. This time her voice was softer. More calculated. "Alexander, everyone is waiting for you." He nodded but did not move. "I know." "Then what are you doing?" she asked. "Thinking." Victoria looked around the room. "About what?" Alexander's eyes settled on Noah. About what success was supposed to mean. The answer surprised even him. A long silence followed. Emily wished she could disappear. She never wanted to become the center of anyone's story. Yet fate had placed her there anyway. "We should leave," she said quietly. "This is not our place." Noah immediately looked disappointed. "But I want to hear more about Dad." Emily's heart tightened. Alexander heard the words too. He slowly walked back toward them. "You deserve to hear about him," he said. Emily looked up. "Alexander." No, his voice remained gentle. "He deserves to know." Noah's eyes brightened. Alexander knelt until they were nearly eye level. "Your father was the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday." Noah smiled. "Really? Every single one? Even if there were lots of people? Especially then?" Noah laughed softly. Alexander continued. "He was also the first person to believe in me when nobody else did." The ballroom listened carefully. When people said our company would fail, he stayed. Noah looked proud despite never having met the man. "That sounds like something Mom would like." Emily lowered her eyes. Several guests smiled. Then Alexander stood and looked across the room at the hundreds of people gathered there. For years, they had admired him for building a company. Tonight, they were witnessing something entirely different. a man remembering the person who helped him become who he was. And as Alexander looked from Noah to Emily, and then toward the wedding aisle waiting for him, he realized the next decision he made would shape far more than the rest of the evening. The ballroom lights seemed softer now, not because they had changed, but because everyone inside was seeing the evening differently. The wedding that had been planned down to the smallest detail had become something else entirely. A reminder, a reckoning, a conversation between the past and the future. Alexander stood quietly for several moments. Then he turned toward the wedding planner waiting nervously near the aisle. "Please give us a little more time," he said. The planner nodded immediately. Nobody argued. Nobody complained. The guests remained seated, watching, listening. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "More time," she repeated. "Alexander, this entire event has already been delayed." He looked at her calmly. "I know. Then why are you letting this continue?" The question echoed through the room. Emily immediately felt uncomfortable. "She is right," she said softly. "Noah and I never intended to interrupt anything." Alexander turned toward her. "You did not interrupt anything." His voice was gentle but firm. "You reminded me of something important." Emily lowered her eyes. She was not used to being defended by people like Alexander Hayes. For years, she had handled life alone, quietly, without expecting anyone to notice. Noah looked around the ballroom. "Is everybody upset?" he asked. A few guests smiled. One elderly woman near the front table shook her head. "Not at all, sweetheart." Noah seemed relieved. Then his attention returned to the photographs. "Dad helped build all this." Alexander followed his gaze. "He helped build the beginning of it." Noah looked impressed. "Then he must have been really smart." A soft laugh moved through the crowd. "He was," Alexander admitted. "Smarter than me sometimes." Noah grinned. "Mom says really smart people do not have to tell everyone they are smart." More smiles appeared around the room. Even a few executives seated near the front laughed quietly. Again, it sounded exactly like something Jonathan would have appreciated. Alexander felt a strange warmth in his chest. For years, Jonathan had existed only as a memory. Tonight, pieces of him seemed alive again. Not through business records. Not through old photographs. Through a little boy. Victoria watched the scene unfold and realized she was losing something she could not recover through planning or appearances. The room was no longer focused on status. It was focused on sincerity. And sincerity could not be managed. "Alexander," she said one last time, "what exactly are you trying to do?" He looked at her carefully before answering. "I am trying to listen." The answer surprised everyone, including himself. Then he walked toward the long head table prepared for the wedding party. Every chair had been assigned. Every place card perfectly positioned. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. Alexander stopped at one empty seat near the center. Slowly, he picked up the place card resting there. The room watched in silence. Then he set it aside. "For 10 years, he said, looking toward the guests, "I thought success meant moving forward as fast as possible." His gaze shifted toward Noah. "Tonight I realized that sometimes you have to stop long enough to remember who helped you get there." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because everyone sensed something important was about to happen. And for the first time all evening, Emily felt that the story was no longer about a wedding being delayed. It was about a promise that had waited 10 years to be honored. Alexander lifted the empty place card and looked across the ballroom one final time. The chandeliers still sparkled. The flowers still lined the aisle. The musicians still waited quietly beside their instruments. Yet the atmosphere had completely changed. Earlier that evening, people had arrived expecting to witness a celebration of wealth and status. Instead, they had become witnesses to something far rarer. Truth. Alexander set the place card down and turned toward Noah. The boy stood beside his mother, unsure why so many people were watching him. "Noah," Alexander said gently, "would you do me a favor?" Noah nodded. "Okay." Alexander pointed toward the empty seat near the center of the head table. "Would you place this there for me?" Noah accepted the card carefully and walked forward. The ballroom remained silent as he reached the table. He placed the card exactly where Alexander had indicated. Then he stepped back. "Perfect," Alexander said softly. Several guests wiped away tears. Even people who had never met Jonathan Reed somehow understood the meaning of the gesture. It was not about an empty chair. It was about remembering someone whose impact still remained. Emily stood motionless. For years, she had carried memories alone. Tonight, for the first time, someone else was carrying them with her. Victoria watched everything unfold. Slowly, she looked around the room and realized something important. Nobody was impressed by wealth at that moment. Nobody cared about designer gowns, expensive flowers, or luxury cars. The thing that held everyone's attention was a simple act of gratitude. Her shoulders lowered. The frustration faded from her expression. In its place came understanding. Some moments could not be controlled. Some moments had to be accepted. Alexander walked toward Emily. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. Emily looked surprised. "For what?" "For not finding you sooner. For not asking more questions years ago. For letting life move so fast that I forgot what mattered." Emily shook her head. "You do not owe me anything." Alexander glanced toward Noah. "I think maybe I do." Noah looked up at him. "Are you sad?" The question caught everyone off guard. Alexander smiled faintly. "A little." Noah considered that answer carefully. Then he said the simplest thing imaginable. "My mom says being sad means somebody mattered." The room grew silent again. Alexander nodded slowly. "Your mom is very wise." Emily laughed softly through her tears. "I cannot take credit for that one. Jonathan used to say it." Alexander looked toward the photograph hanging near the entrance. For a moment, it felt as though his old friend was still part of the evening. Not in memory alone. In every lesson he left behind. In every person he loved. In every life he touched. The musicians quietly began to play again. Soft notes drifted through the ballroom. Not because the schedule demanded it, because it felt right. Noah slipped his hand into his mother's. Emily squeezed it gently. Around them, guests returned to their seats carrying a story they would remember far longer than any wedding speech. And as the evening moved forward beneath the glow of crystal lights, one truth remained clear to everyone in the room. Sometimes the most important name on a guest list is the one that reminds people who they are. And sometimes the quietest people leave the deepest legacy of all.